what I've come up with is a couple source files that y'all should be able to use, a couple scripts to set it up. On the source files, what we're talking about is your aliases, your bash prompt, everything in the shell, right? So it gets that part of it set up for you. I gave you a couple aliases that I like to use, some favorites. I have a little cheat sheet here, and I'm hoping that everyone here can contribute to this project, because I'm not the one that knows it all, and there's definitely some tools here that y'all probably know. There's something better out there. So let's all create some pull requests and contribute together. Did everyone get on this page on GitHub? This is going to be something that you can reference later. I don't necessarily want to go through this line by line because that would get very boring. But this is a project you can come back to. And the general idea behind what I set up is I set up this computer right here, and I tried to document every unique thing I did to make my life easier and also make things secure, right? So we have FireVault here. Xcode, just kind of skimming through this real quick, is pretty good for mobile development if you want to get that going. Chrome has its mobile inspector, but Xcode actually has a device setting that's recognized by websites in some cases. So I would recommend using Xcode for your mobile development. If anyone doesn't know, Chrome's developer tools are super awesome. I'm seeing some thumbs up.
Right-click inspect.
Yep, right-click and inspect. It's the way to go.
Firebug entirely. It's just,
yeah. Yep. Anybody use Firefox? No. I think Brandon is in the process of switching back.
To Firefox?
Potentially.
No, I'm on Firefox.
You're already on Firefox? Okay.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Okay. For anyone who couldn't hear Brandon, he said it's terrible.
It's terrible, but it hasn't given up on not being evil. I use Netscape.
No. Okay, well, there's probably some people here that are using some tools that are out of date. Specifically, I mentioned FileZilla, which I think Charles has some debates on whether or not that's a good tool. But I've been using FileZilla for I don't even know how many years. Me and my dad were using that, and I mean it's a great tool for a specific, what I'm going to call stage of development, but eventually you will do the transition off of FileZilla, so I'll get you there, Charles. And GitHub is actually what I would consider a pretty good replacement. If anyone is not using Git, you should be. Source code management and Git is the way to go. So who's using Git? Yes, love to see it. For anybody not using it, go out and just do a Google search on Git, learn some of the basics, create an account on GitHub. As you notice, this account, this repository is on GitHub. And so this is how you're going to reference everything you set up. I should have put how to set up Git in here and created a GitHub account and everything like that. But that's a whole nother evening.
I got you back on that one.
Yeah, you agree with that?
Well, actually, I already wrote 3 instructions for setting up Git locally and setting up GitHub.
Good deal.
But we ended up using Bitbucket for the class I'm doing because Bitbucket has free private accounts if you use .edu. So
okay.
I'll send you the GitHub pages.
Yeah, so for anyone who's remote, Charles has a repository on how to set all this up, and he's willing to share it with us. So he will send it my way. I can update this document to include a link to that. I'm sure we can throw it in the Slack channel, get that up there.
It's an MD file, so I'll just push it out.
Okay.
Anybody using Subversion?
Is anyone using Subversion? Nope.
I used it a long time ago. Didn't like it.
That's some real subversive talk right there. Some companies just
Well, I'm glad that Drupal has transitioned over to Git. I think Brandon is a committer on D.O, so he can actually use all of the Git tools up there. So thank you, Brandon, contributing to open source projects that we all use.
which everybody here is correct. So,
That's why they say Linus Torvalds invented Git, because he hated subversion.
Yep. So definitely step one, get GitHub, set those up, and then you can continue forward with the rest of this process, because actually part of this process would be to clone down the repository onto your local machine to get some of those scripts that I'm setting up and those aliases and everything like that. Anything else I need to mention about Git? Dina, you said you had some questions. Right, so in the browser, you just go to github.com, and then that'll take you to GitHub. GITHUB.com.
if you go to the help section, GitHub has a lot of stuff on, like how to learn Git also.
The help section of GitHub. I noticed that GitHub is pretty nice in that you can make changes and you don't even have to know the command line or anything like that. You can just log in the user interface, make a change on the website, and submit it, which I actually got my mom to do to this repository. So she has her first commit on a open source project.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, we need contributors to documentation. Documentation can always be updated.
If it isn't documented, it doesn't exist.
Actually, that's a pretty good example, because if it's not documented, then you don't know it's out there. You can't find it. So hopefully everyone here becomes a contributor to Drupal, which would be another evening talk, D.O.
I tossed a link into the free Git book.
And D.O is Drupal.org. Okay. So Charles, you
in Slack.
in Slack.
The free Git book.
Great. Yeah, I just did. And for anyone who's watching remotely, we're using Slack. And Brandon, what's the link? adug-slack.herokuapp.com. Feel free to join and sign up. And we also have a chat box on the live events of YouTube. Is anyone monitoring that? Anybody want to volunteer to monitor that?
I've been keeping an eye on it.
Okay, Charles will watch it. So we'll see if any questions come in from our remote people.
That was, or I think they've come over to Hangouts.
Are they in Hangouts?
Yeah, they were in chat on YouTube. I know Vito's over in Hangouts.
Yeah, Doug is the one that actually helped me set up this remote process. So thank you, Doug. Some of my other just tools that I'm using right now, I liked the Color Picker app mainly. It's free. It allows you to pick colors on your screen, which is nice. Slack, we're obviously talking about getting everyone on Slack. It is a great tool. I really love it. I use it at work. I use it for different social groups. I use it for this group. I almost can't get off of it now. I have things popping up all the time. I actually closed Slack right now because it's giving me too many notifications all the time, and I didn't want that on my screen. I have been using Komodo Edit for a while. I recently installed Atom, and I'm actually pretty happy with it. So for anyone who doesn't have a good text editor that they like, Atom is free. It's open sourced. You can contribute your own modules and projects. If something's broken, you can change it. I always like open source projects. Actually, most of the tools in here should be open sourced. I think everything should be free. I may have picked a few that are not open sourced though. And actually, Charles, you like Sublime, and I have a to-do mention in here, and I was actually thinking that at some point I could convince you to contribute there.
Sublime and PHP Storm.
Sublime and PHP Storm.
Out of the box.
Now, PHP Storm you have to pay for.
Yeah.
I have free stuff on here.
Out of the box, Atom.io is much, much better. Because
Okay.
Sublime you have to configure.
So Charles likes Atom because you don't have to configure it.
What about brackets?
Sublime Text 2.
Which one?
What about brackets?
Okay. And
Bracket?
Brackets.
Hmm.
Shall we try now?
Have you heard of
Show the
Bracket,
brackets?
Charles? Haven't heard of it.
Brackets seem to be more oriented towards web development. That's something I've noticed. Whereas Sublime doesn't use much resources, but Atom does use a bit more resources as compared to Sublime.
Okay, so Atom is better than brackets?
Atom is better than Bracket, but it does use more resources.
So Atom uses more resources, but it's better out of the box and potentially all around. Okay. So it looks like people like Atom. PHP Storm is not a text editor, it's an IDE.
It's Komodo IDE. It's an IDE like Komodo.
So not on this list is NetBeans, and at some point I use NetBeans because they're free and I could use Xdebug with NetBeans. When Komodo Edit, you can't use it on the free edition. So if you're looking for Xdebug, you can do NetBeans.
So I have a to-do for you.
Okay.
Your profile picture on GitHub, you're wearing a bow tie. Are
Yes.
you staying with that?
Yeah, well,
All the rage.
it was pretty nice. That was actually a wedding picture. So yeah, that was like the last and only time I wear a bow tie. I'm actually a tie person most of the time. All right. So actually, I didn't mention this, but I'm a CPA, and so I actually transitioned into web development about a year ago. Yeah. So that's that world a few years ago.
Yeah, happy 1-year anniversary, man.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it actually probably is just right at a year. Cool. Thank you, John. Keeping track of me. Komodo Edit.
Yeah, this is Komodo.
So that's an IDE that I used. I would actually recommend Atom over that.
Okay,
So it's a tool comparable. And so after you get all this stuff set up, let's talk about working remotely, right? You have to set up your SSH keys. Who's familiar with SSH keys? Okay. I should expand this tutorial to include some links on how to set up SSH keys. Basically, it makes it to where you don't have to type your password on remote servers, and that's really nice. GitHub is one of the ones I recommend setting up your SSH keys. It's a secure communication between your computer and another computer. And like I said, you don't have to use your passwords. It stores a private key and a public key, and it does some magic in the background to make it all work.
Question, are those keys repository specific?
I actually set up mine to be not necessarily repository specific, but server specific. Right, so if you have a different .com, like github.com versus pantheon.io, you can set up different SSH keys and you use a config file for each remote. And I'll have to come up with some sort of example with non-private files that I can share with everybody. But yeah, setting up your SSH config file is a really good thing to do, especially for when you're having problems. But your config file can actually cause problems too. Any other questions about keys? Anybody want to expand on the importance of keys? They're different, but they work like pretty much the same. Brandon, you want to expand on that, differences between SSH and SSL?
So they're both ways to secure communications between two endpoints, but SSL is generally used to secure HTTP connections. So that's what your web browser uses, and that's what web servers use. It can also be used to secure any other like TCP stuff, but that's what most people think of as it's for HTTP secure stuff. SSH is a shell protocol. So secure, I think it's secure shell.
Yep.
So it's more than just a security layer. It's like a whole shell protocol. So it does a little bit of both. Like, but you could secure your SSH with SSL. So the SSL is kind of like one level lower.
So for anyone at home, the difference is where SSL is for HTTP connections. They're both use the words point-to-point, right? And SSH is a secure shell that, I know you use some word in there.
It's a shell protocol.
It's a shell
Actually,
protocol.
SSH into an IP address or into a domain, and it's a secure terminal communication shell. And SSL is a secure socket.
So you get the full shell with SSH, and you can log into a remote server using an IP address, a domain name, anything like that. And it's just like the shell on your machine, but it's on a remote server. And it's secure. So I think that covers kind of the differences between those two. We got a group of smart people here, so feel free to throw your questions out.
Things come up to me before is like working on the PC side versus the Mac side or Unix is, sometimes your terminal app will be different, two different environments.
That the terminal will be different between PC
Terminal over here,
and Mac.
then you've got maybe a PuTTY terminal over there. They both accept the SSH.
That is very important to bring up, right? So you're on a remote server, which means your terminal is different, and so you're going to lose your settings. You're not going to have access to the same files, right? If you installed Drush on your local machine, you might not have Drush up on the remote server if it's something that you're setting up. So there's going to be a lot of differences there because it is a different computer. Good point.
Everybody remembers Telnet. SSH was kind of a replacement for that. Telnet's very insecure, and if it's running on your machine, you should shut it off.
Recommendation to shut off Telnet.
Basically, I just, generate SSH key on my computer and then use it everywhere, right?
Right, yeah, so Dina just did a Google search for SSH keys, and everyone else can do that. Just find an article on how to set it up, and your ID underscore. Does anybody want to talk about RSA versus, is it DSA? Brandon, you want to come over here, use the mic, because I think people couldn't hear you last time.
I mean, I'm speaking outside of my deep knowledge here, but it doesn't really matter which one you pick. RSA is the default. There are two different encryption algorithms. Really what it boils down to. As long as your key length is long enough, that doesn't matter which one you pick.
So
Just stick with the defaults.
they're two different encryption algorithms, and as long as you have long key lengths, then it should be secure. And that was pretty much my understanding of the topic too. It's just a different algorithm, but if it's a certain length, then you're good.
They both have government backdoors. Get comment.
I know that I ran into some problems where different remote servers required keys set up with different encryptions, so that may be a thing that everybody has to set up. Actually, some remote servers also require keys of different lengths, which is where your config file comes in. You can set a different key file for each different server.
Which config file are you talking about?
The SSH config.
In which folder?
So it's in your home directory. It's in .ssh, and it's called config, C-O-N-F-I-G. And feel free to do Google searches and look for how to set that up. There's stuff out there.
It's always confusing, I think, especially to a beginner.
Oh yeah, that part.
Find the info files and config files. User versus the root.
I agree. And that's why we're here today, right, to try to explain some of that. Thanks for bringing it up, because the location of the file is very important.
I've got a question I'm pretty new to using the command line.
Okay.
So what's the advantage of using sudo over just logging in as root?
Very good question. Right, so don't log in as root. I think up in the beginning of my introduction, I put don't use sudo unless you have to. And I should have started this presentation with that. A lot of things on the internet tell you to use sudo. Most of the time, you don't have to. Once you use it, you generally have to continue using it. And it can be very dangerous to use that when you're downloading code off the internet and you don't know what it does, right? So there's a lot of things that do not require it. So if you're installing a new tool, try it without it and see if it installs. And if it does, you're good to go.
If it crashes while you're a super user, the Mac super user access to your machine.
Right, so if you run something with sudo, they can come in and do whatever they want on your machine. Very good question.
That's how a lot of hacks work.
So how do you know
When to use it and when not to use it?
when not to? You know you're crossing that line.
The machine tells you I can't do this.
Well, I know, but it would seem to me that
So I've limited it to changing permissions, like right here. I think potentially the only time I use it in this tutorial is to change the permissions on the user local directory. And then after that, like nothing else uses it. Right, so I changed the permissions so that Homebrew could install itself in there, right? And so if anybody gets my Homebrew or whatever, then like that's should be the extent of their access. And so they're not going to be able to go deeper than that. Now, granted, nothing is super secure, right? I'm sure even the Mac operating system has vulnerabilities. So we just do our best. This is like best practices. We're never going to be able to be super secure.
Sudo stands for super user do, and it only executes that one line you type as opposed to logging in as the super user root. But you stay every command after that. You do super user commands.
So
they're all
that means your whole system is vulnerable.
Right, and while you're logged in, if somebody has a keylogger or something installed, they get your super user password and everything every time you do that.
Right, yeah.
There's all kinds of reasons why you don't.
So just take the advice, make it harder for people to do bad stuff on your computer by not using sudo. It doesn't mean they can't do it, you just make it a little bit harder. And so briefly, I'll just mention, at some point, I was running a Drupal server out of my house, and it was open to the public, right? You know, anybody could come look at the server. Hackers got in, they took over the computer, they basically did God knows what, and I basically threw away the computer, right? I did at least do something smart in that the public server was a computer by itself with like nothing else on it, right? So the only thing I had was my like little personal website on like a $20 used Mac. So I was like, whatever, you know, sunk cost. But I did make a lot of mistakes in that I wasn't using Git, right? So I didn't have source code management on like any of my stuff, and I lost my website. So at that point, the website was gone. I didn't put it up on GitHub. I didn't have a copy of it. Those were some mistakes that I would try to pass on to y'all. Don't make. There's certain workflows. I gave another talk probably 6 months ago on security. I would recommend watching that, and we'll definitely upload that to this new ADUG channel we just created. But watch that. It talks about Git. It talks about good workflows for Drupal development, and it'll go deeper into that. But we're not talking about that today. So I think we definitely talked about don't use sudo. Did we have other questions? Are we ready to move on to some specific tools? All right, let's move on to Homebrew. At some point, I thought Homebrew was a bad idea, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm downloading code from people I don't know, I'm putting it on my computer, I'm running it. Now I'm like, I can't live without Homebrew. It is so easy to install all sorts of things that I used to take days to install. So use Homebrew, download whatever packages you want. Actually, new packages are coming out every day. Just earlier today, my mentor contributed a patch to get Terminus updated on Homebrew. I guess they already had it on Brew, but they didn't have their latest version. For anyone who doesn't know what Terminus is, it's Pantheon's command line utility. How many Pantheon users do we have? What's Pantheon? Okay, Pantheon is a Drupal host, and it makes it super easy to set all this stuff up. They even have free development sites, so as long as you're not production, you can get on there, you can test it out, you can have a Drupal sandbox kind of just ready to go for you. Pantheon does use their own workflow and their own repository, so it's not going to be a standard Drupal install. They have their own special, unique things that they use.
Do you think it would be a good idea for Apple to create its own Homebrew, like something which Apple controls?
I'd probably use it, but I heard a no. I think I'm not going to get an explanation of the no. So I guess it has opinions. I have not explained what Homebrew is, other than magic, right? Because it just makes things work. I guess I would consider Homebrew like the package manager for Macs. Is that a good explanation?
It's kind of like an apt-get.
Right, it's like an apt-get for Macs. And it has all sorts of packages. I actually don't know what the extent of the packages are. I'm guessing it has all sorts of stuff. I find out new stuff every day, every time I turn around.
What do we mean by packages in this context?
PHP is one of the things that I use. If you look further down here, so it'll get PHP on your computer up to date with just a simple brew install PHP 5.6. And I like to use with Pear because there's other, like Pear is another package manager. Almost everything I talk about is either going to be package managers or version control managers today because they just make your life so much easier. Literally I spent days and weeks setting stuff up, and now it takes 10 minutes.
Doesn't Homebrew also allow Linux commands that are not available?
Right, so I think I've seen brew, like brew installed, wget is like probably the most famous one that I always see on like everybody's machines. What else are some other ones that you guys use? Linux commands? Yeah, so Composer is listed on here. And it reduces the amount of fighting you have to do with the computer.
But you were asking about packages. Yeah. Packages are groups of utilities that tell what dependencies and everything that they need. And there's all different kinds, like the
MySQL
Red
is on
Hat's
there.
packages are RPMs, and Debians are DBs. But they will install a group of commands that are supposed to be used together and tell you which dependencies they need. Usually, the good package managers will check and see that you have those. apt-get one of them.
So for anyone at home, it installs tools and their dependencies, and that's what we're saying a package manager does. But it just works. Like you don't have to fight with it. I would generally see like system tools, right? So if you were running a server, things like PHP, MySQL, those types of tools are going to be available.
Right. So what you're saying for the novice user is that it's going to do a lot of finding of the parts and components that are really unfamiliar to you. You just want to run Drupal.
Right. If you just want to run
Start it on
Drupal,
your computer, and all of a sudden something's not working, and you got to do 2 days research to find out there's something called FOAP. No, that's PHP.
right.
And if you try to do it by hand, it's a pain in the butt.
I have
And you get the wrong version.
I've tried to do MySQL by hand before, and I always run into all sorts of weird bugs.
Howdy.
Hello.
So these package management, Homebrew has its way of smoothing all of those rough spots for you, clearing all
Right. So
the really geeky stuff that's between the novice user and a successful site out of the way.
yep. And let me transmit that to the people at home. That it allows you to just focus on what you want to focus on, and the tools that were described as very geeky that you don't necessarily want to know how to install, this just takes care of that, right? You don't have to have a deep, extensive knowledge of the command line and figure out different permissions on weird things and making sure, like in my case, the mysql.sock file exists and it's been created and it's running and everything like that.
Homebrew is just on Mac.
And Homebrew is a Mac tool, so actually everything we're talking about today is going to be Mac focused.
It's like the command line version of App Store.
It is the command line version of the App Store, yes.
There are other package managers like MacPorts and stuff like that, but I don't like it.
And I think of notable mention is Brewcask. Brewcask will actually install apps for you, right? So we're talking about things that normally show up in your applications folder that you can put on your dock. So Brewcask is what takes care of that. So if you didn't want to use the App Store or things weren't on the App Store, they might be available as a cask.
So you discussing Homebrew, or what are you discussing?
Mhm.
Right now.
How's it related to PHP?
It'll install PHP for you.
Cool.
And it just works out of the box, just like one line on the terminal and
This is
go.
talking about environments for specific tools.
There's also, like on OS X, there's a thing called package stores. It's originally based in NetBSD. But the company by the name Giant, they actually have like binary packages for OS X that provide it. So you can also install that. The address for that is pkgsrc.giant.com.
Okay. Well, yeah,
I'm Constantine.
Constantine, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, so what we're doing is we're running through different tools specifically right now that I'm using, but I would love to hear about new tools that everybody else knows about. And we have a repository up on GitHub that I would love for people to put PRs up against, and let's discuss some different tools and see if there's something new out there. So this is also Drupal focused, right? So Composer is going to be something that Drupal 8 uses a lot, but to install it, you can just type brew install Composer, and it just works. Brandon, you're searching, what you brought up? Okay. Well, so actually one of the things that I would love to hear somebody talk about is ZSH. I've actually had a lot of problems setting it up, and I basically just threw it out right now because I'm getting weird errors from it. I think specifically it was related to my prompt. I think I need to redo the bash prompt file in order to work with ZSH because they have their own way to format it. But so, I mean, that's what I was working on ZSH. Well, so it is a different shell, right?
So the secret is to use OMyZSH.
Oh, my ZSH. Okay. I will. You want to throw a PR up against the thing and tell me how to do that? Sounds good. Do we want to talk about it? It's someone who knows how to use it other than me. Anything of notable mention?
So it's really not that much different than Bash. It just gives you like So like, if you tab complete, you know, you want to CD into a directory, but you don't like remember what the full path is. So you get halfway there, you tab complete, it'll bring up a grid of all the folders that are in there. And then you can use the arrow keys, like to select the one you want instead of typing. So it's more interactive. It gives you more nice things. It doesn't give you like, there's nothing in it you can't technically do with Bash. It's just nicer in CSH.
So it has a little bit of graphical user interface.
It's all in the terminal still.
Yeah.
There are some extra interactivity things in places that are convenient. But it's not like in your face. You don't get like a big window. It's just like niceties.
So
You don't have to know, like if you install like OpenZSH, it'll change your default shell to ZSH, and you can like not look up or Google anything else, and you'll be able to do everything you could in Bash in ZSH. And then you just kind of learn one nice thing at a time until eventually you're like, oh, I can never go back to Bash.
Do you use it routinely?
Yeah, it's my default.
so once you learn it, you never go back. And would it be proper for me to say that it doesn't necessarily extend Bash because it's not Bash, but it has all of the same Bash functions plus a lot of nice tools that make it easy for you to work with. And I've also seen a lot of new people to the command line use it because it's easier to work with. It extends Born, which is like Bash. Okay.
So I think Bash it's only like a pretty hefty binary. How big is ZSH compared to Bash? It has more features than Bash and it's only Bash compatible.
Yeah, I mean it's not.
I'm actually like a TCSH user. TCSH myself.
It's not something I install like on my servers. It's just what I have on my computer.
On your local machine.
Anywhere else. I just have ZSH. That's my thing that I use on my computer.
So why did you install on the servers?
I don't have any good reason. Why not?
So for everyone at home, we're broadcasting too. For everyone at home, ZSH is good for local development. It's not necessarily, sometimes you can't install it on a remote server, right? Because you wouldn't have access to that. So that would be something that's a local development tool just to make it easier for you. All right. Any other shell discussion?
What do you like about TCSH? I've never used it.
I primarily originally got introduced to it by FreeBSD. So it's the default shell in FreeBSD. And one of the nice things I like about it is that it has, by default on FreeBSD, if you type something like in the command line and you press the app button, it actually searches your history and then it finds that comment and it basically kind of lets you scroll your history based on what you typed. So for example, like if you run like a whole bunch of commands, right? And then you remember that you usually run like a specific wget command to like test your internet connectivity, right? And you just say wget and then you just press up or right? And then it shows you like all the previous wget commands that you ran.
And then I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. I didn't necessarily realize when I created this, almost I think everything is command line focused. So we're actually going to be talking about the terminal and the command line a lot today. So maybe I should have put that in the description. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today.
What do you recommend is the best way to learn the command line for people that are new to using it?
Good question. What's the best way to learn the command line?
WebTuts. There's a NetTuts.
NetTuts?
Mastering, CLI, NetTuts.
It's free.
The command line is your best friend. Is that the? They have a really nice work instruction that I used. That's not it.
Is it mainly focused on Bash? bash, or does
Oh,
it
wait,
have other specific
yeah,
command line
or-
stuff? Apple has all this command line stuff that they don't pick up.
Give me just a second. Let me see if I can find the link.
For anyone at home that doesn't know, there's a difference between the command line in Linux and a difference between the command line on a Mac. They use different commands, and so I mean you have to kind of pick one on which one you want to learn. You could use Homebrew to install all of the Linux stuff and just learn that.
Or package stores.
But what's that?
Or package stores.
Right.
Package stores?
Package store.
Okay.
The advantage of package stores is that it's actually available. It was originally originated in NetBSD, as I mentioned, but it's also a native packet management tool in Elon Solaris, Open Solaris, and it's also available on Linux. So, like, you can actually install it like on all of your machines, and that's one of the advantages about it, right? So, it's the same tree from which the packages are built. So if you use package stores, then you can potentially install the same versions, the same exact versions, on both your development environment at home and on your Linux server or FreeBSD server or Linux server in the cloud. So, and like the commands are going to be the same.
And did we find where to learn the commands?
Yes, the command line for web design at webdesign.tutsplus.com.
Webdesign.tutsplus.com?
Yep, and you have to go search it to yourself because I'm not going to paste it to Slack.
You're not going to paste it to Slack.
Yeah, that Code Academy also has it.
And Code Academy also
Patty
has
disappeared.
learning the command line. And Patty just arrived.
I found a book that I went through one summer, just taught myself. There's also OS Training has a complete tutorial sequentially.
OS training.
OS Training. Very good.
So once you learn the commands, they don't really change that much.
Oh yeah, no, they're not going to change.
You can read the man page for every single.
Yeah, you could read the man page, but that would be if you like torture, most likely.
What's the command?
So you can man like a command, and it will give you the manual, and it's very technical.
It's a self-hate tool.
Yeah, if
You know,
if you don't like yourself, you read the man pages.
Good reference thing if you want to look something up. That man and the command. See if there's a manual page for it. But they're usually quite verbose.
Well, that is completely not true, I think, because like the manual pages actually shows you like all the options that you're supposed to be able to use.
Right.
And like each option is described in just like one paragraph.
But to me, it's like an encyclopedia when you want to look something up as opposed to a learning tool. Where you want to go there and read the man page. It's overwhelming for a new user.
This is what a man page looks like.
That is a man page.
It's useful, but it's a lot of text.
It is a lot of text and a lot of options that you'll probably never use.
But he's right in that it is complete. The very first line shows you the usage and all the options on it. I do look at that one.
So this is where I'm trying to fill in the gap on like the cheat sheet file that I created. Right, like when you use a command, you're not going to go and use all of the options. You generally have like a command and a certain set of options that you use, and that's what you use. You don't have to change it very often. So
File is called useful CLI commands.
Mhm.
I pull that quite a lot. They also make those cheat sheets like they do for algebra and geometry that you find in stores. You can order those from Amazon.
Mhm.
CLI.
So maybe that would be a good thing for someone who's learning to buy the cheat sheet, find the commands that are common.
They're not cheat sheets, they're just reference.
Well, it's a reference sheet, but it would be a good way if you're just getting into it. Definitely have that on your desk.
I have a stack of cheat sheets on my desk that no matter how many times I use the command, I still have the cheat sheets there because you're going to forget it.
Yeah.
It's important to understand what the commands are and what they're for, not necessarily what the commands are.
What the exact command is. Yeah.
You know, that's what your cheat sheets are for.
It's kind of a joke since everything in Linux is tongue in cheek. Thought they would have a boy command.
Well, I guess on that note, we'll move to the next tool. I listed, these are Drupal VM related tools. Drupal VM I use on like every single website that I develop. It runs a Linux machine like within your Mac as a server, and it pretty much sets up the server for you. So you can have a local development environment. There is definitely a learning curve on the configuration file, right? Getting this set up the first time, you need to know what the options are that you use and how to set it up. But then once the machine is running, it's a great environment to do local development. I think there are some differences of opinion. If you're just learning, Acquia Dev Desktop is super easy. You're not going to have to fight with anything, but you're also going to not have a lot of options that you would in Drupal VM. So probably if you're just getting started, go with Acquia Dev Desktop and then upgrade from there to Drupal VM.
So what's the advantage of using a VM?
The VM, you can put things like Solr for search, and so that's one example. There's all sorts of other tools like Xdebug, XHProf. I'm just thinking of the ones in the configuration file. What else do they have? Memcache. And so it would be more likely to match a remote environment if you were hosting with somebody. Pantheon's not a good example, but probably Acquia would be. Like you would be more likely to match their environment. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, VM just lets you easier match impression, so you avoid issues between
Different versions of different things running.
PHP 7 locally, but 5.6 on production.
So you can change your version of PHP.
Yeah.
You can do that in Dev Desktop.
Yeah. But, yeah, there's also like Calbox is another option that integrates with Pantheon.
I've heard a lot of people talking about Calabox, so I'm going to have to look into it.
2 weeks after I got you all set up. So the newer version is just like explodes if you're not using direct for Pantheon.
So we do have people reporting that Calabox has exploded recently,
Like,
and we
it's
think
beautiful, and now it won't load up for just regular local development unless it's Pantheon. I don't know.
we don't know this for sure, but we think it may be related to Docker releasing a for Mac version of Docker, because Docker didn't have a Mac version, and now they do, and then all of a sudden Calabox broke. So we think that A plus B equals C, but we're not sure. So we have a lot of fans, but
In terms of other Drupal specific options, Amazy.io has a local environment.
Amazy.io has a local development option, and that's for containers or VMs, or
It also uses Docker.
it also uses Docker, so it's container-based development.
And phase 2 has their dev tools.
Phase 2 has their dev tools.
Yes, which is, it's not quite a VM environment, it's more of a system development theme building tool. So it integrates Pattern Lab and Git and Screen Refresh and Grunt. It integrates like 7 different things, and I got lost watching my mentor use it. He was really fast and neat, though.
Okay. So there's a lot of really neat tools that can help you work really fast, but there may be some sort of, yeah.
So I've experienced the VMs for Pantheon and Acquia. But what about DigitalOcean? Does anybody have experience with that? Setting up a VM, DigitalOcean?
Yeah, you start, they give you a VM that has nothing, right? You pick what operating system you want, and so you can either start with your fresh operating system where you have to do everything yourself, or they have recipes, I think is what they call them. So you can say, give me a LAMP stack, or give me, OCloud, or give me whatever. And they'll start off with an image that has all that stuff already.
So you want to set up a standard Ubuntu setup.
Yeah, but then you're on your own, right? If you start with Ubuntu proper and you want to run a Drupal site on it, well, you have to install Apache and PHP and MySQL and configure those correctly.
So the wisdom of the crowd here is that Pantheon setup is the absolute easiest.
Wisdom of the crowd is people like Pantheon because it's very easy to set up.
Or Dev Desktop.
Or Dev Desktop.
Yeah, well, but that, again, I've noticed the things that you said about it too. And I've been using Aqua Dev Desktop to do some distro experiments, just checking out distros. It's very good for that. Very fast.
And so I think some of the discussion that people missed at home about DigitalOcean was that they have recipes and other boxes that are just kind of ready to go. But I would also love to hear more about setting up boxes on DigitalOcean if anybody wants to contribute that back to the group. I think it's awesome. I know that Drupal VM has been used with DigitalOcean, and there is some sort of way to push that out, right? So you can push your Drupal VM up to DigitalOcean. I haven't found necessarily like an article on how to do that, but I know it's been done.
Well, there probably is an article in there, documentation has got great DigitalOcean.
We have a very strong community.
I'll have to find that.
And just since we've mentioned them all, I should mention Druid, D-R-U-D.
Druid.
I've never touched it or used it, but I hear it's great.
No one has ever touched it, but they hear good things about it. I'll actually go ahead and mention it. I learned about something called Scotch that's like Drupal VM. It doesn't have as many tools as Drupal VM, but it's in the same category as Drupal VM. It spins up virtual machines.
You can talk any about Ansible.
I mean, Ansible for me pretty much just works. There's almost not too much to talk about. Like, you install it, and, well, I mean, when it breaks, and then it's kind of a pain. But when it works, it works. So,
Ansible for DevOps.
Ansible for DevOps. I want to learn more about Ansible.
And if Jeff says something works in a specific way for technology, just accept it.
Just accept it if Jeff said it works. I mean, that's actually pretty much how I work, like, for my entire life. Yeah.
Jeff and Rob for hardware, Brandon and my mentor for software.
I think I already have that. So.
Yep. Well, and so I didn't put a link here to Drupal VM, but you can do a Google search for the project, and it has a great documentation, like it was mentioned, on how to set that up. These are the like sub tools that you would need to work with it, which is why I mentioned them. I was also reading an article on just how to set up your Mac, and they mentioned this font, which I actually also thought looks very nice. So if you want a nice looking shelf font, you can download that.
Wait, there's an external shell font better than what Apple provides you with? I do not believe that. I find that impossible to believe, sorry.
Yep.
I always tweak if I use the Mac terminal to make it look like a Linux kernel. Change all.
Is there some chat going on?
Broken fonts or something?
No, I got your Vim instruction.
All right. Here is iTerm 2. Anybody want to discuss the advantages or disadvantages of using iTerm? Brandon, are you linking
Control N
something?
allows you to pop up multiple terminals.
Dude, F1, man. Term, no term.
F1, term and no term. There we go. It's very nice. And that is the only reason you use it, apparently.
Because Control S, you can have a terminal for your like local development box, a terminal for your server, and a terminal for your actual PC, Mac.
And that's Control S.
Control S.
Control S sets up your different servers.
No, it adds a new console.
It adds a new console.
So you can have
Okay.
a window here, here, and here.
But for you, you use it for different servers.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see. Okay, I like Nano. We're going to talk about how everyone's been lost and locked into Vim, right?
That's what I was laughing about a second ago. I saw your instructions for Vim.
The thing you need to learn about Vim is how to get out of Vim, because I'm pretty sure everyone has been in the scenario where Vim just opens and then you're like, oh god, how do I get out of this? I am trapped in Vim forever.
It's that thing the guy said I've been using Vim for the last 10 years. But no, I exited.
I've been using Vim for the last 10 years because I can't get out of it.
Why don't you have Emacs instructions?
I like Nano. It is very easy to use, and I started using it and I never looked back.
The instructions are there on the screen.
The instructions are on the screen. I can never forget the commands. Compared to Vim, it's like, yes, please, thank you. On which one? In Nano? You've been trapped in Nano? Huh.
Yeah, if you hit like
Interesting.
page and search at the same time, you're searching the next page.
Interesting.
So it's like
I've
if you
not
hit
had that
command
happen to me
select
before.
twice, yeah.
So next page and search apparently does some weird things in Nano. I'm actually going to go try this now.
I used VI before Vim came out. I never chose to try Vim because I didn't like VI.
What do you use now?
I usually use Nano.
This is my dad.
Yeah, I know it. It's kind of.
So that's why you're having bad influence on it.
He taught me Nano.
Cheers to that.
All right. You can put color schemes on your terminal so it looks a bit nicer. A lot of people like Solarized. I also like Solarized. They have a light and dark version. Right now I'm using the light version. So I linked some different files on how to install that. Okay, how many people are familiar with Dresh here? I'm familiar with Dresh. Very good. If you're not, and you're doing Drupal development, this is a command line tool that you just pretty much can't live without. Install it, learn the basic commands that you're going to need, and start using them. I talk here about how to install different versions of Dresh, because different versions of not only Drupal, but you can run into different scenarios where you need to use a different version, and the way you know that is that it just doesn't work. So I default to using 7 because it just works. So Dresh Up will upgrade your site. If you're interested in maintaining sites, Dresh is the way to go. You could download the packages off of Drupal.org and copy it over and install it and everything like that, but Dresh will just take care of it for you. Dresh Up by itself installs all of the updates, but you can say Dresh Up a specific module or Dresh Up Drupal, and it will update Drupal core, which had an update today. Well, so every Wednesday is not a Drupal core update, but every Wednesday is security updates. And if you're not on the security mailing list or you're not following their Twitter account, start. And especially if you have an active Drupal site up and running.
How long does it take to be hacked if you don't follow that?
Well, so I got hacked. I think you were maybe outside when I mentioned that, but I had a site.
When I was outside, you got hacked. It's like
yeah.
that's pretty fast, man.
It is. Yeah, no, it's very quick. Well, I actually had. I wasn't on the mailing list during Drupalgeddon, if you know what Drupalgeddon was, but it was basically like this really bad security patch that allowed you to get into a site using SQL injection. and so my site was gone, my server was gone.
6 hours.
So I think a lot of the hosting companies were reporting that after 7 hours, scripts were running in alphabetical order across their domains looking for sites that had this vulnerability. So, yeah, they could just see it going down the list.
6 hours, you were good, and you didn't.
So the whole internet got hacked within 6 hours?
So my site actually, this is when I was terrible. I said that I was on an island because I was not involved in the Drupal community, and I was just like chilling at my house, like making my Drupal site, not paying attention to anything. I left my Drupalgeddon hacked site up for like 6 months, and finally Time Warner shut off my internet. And then I was like, why'd you guys shut off my internet? And they were like, one of your computers got hacked. They were, yeah. You probably didn't get an email from me because I got involved in the group right after that. But yeah, that was, oh, well, actually, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about a different email. Yeah, so my server was trying to send out spam, is probably what you're talking about.
Because the Drupal hack basically turned your server into a giant, massive spam.
Yeah, so my computer got caught trying to connect to a command and control center for a botnet.
Did you notice that it was like really, really slow?
Well, so it was on a machine that I didn't care about. I set up my own little like public server machine that I just like left run and didn't pay attention to.
It was in your house? At your house?
Yeah, and that was a terrible idea, and I'll never do it again. Yeah, it. No, I had to call Time Warner and like wait 3 days and talk to people, and then they told me to like go look at all of my Windows machines, and I was running it on a Mac, and so I went on my Windows machines and like updated everything and checked for viruses and malware, and I'm like, my Windows machine is fine, it wasn't even turned on, and but then I was like, okay, if it's not the Windows machine, it's got to be the server, and I went and looked, and I saw there was an administrator account that I didn't create, so I just unplugged the machine, and I was done with that.
So is it still unplugged and still running?
Yeah, it's still unplugged. Just kind of like sitting in a box right now. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. I should probably just throw it away.
Can't you just wipe the hard drive?
Well, so actually, this was at the same time that me and my dad were experimenting with flashing graphics cards, and I was like, if I can flash a graphics card, then I'm sure other people can too. So it's sitting in a box, and I'm not just wiping the hard drive.
So what you're telling me is you've got a computer just sitting there that you can hook up to somebody's network and get their
And probably let it connect to like a command and control center botnet. Yeah, yeah, I do have a computer just sitting there ready to go.
I mean, that sounds like the perfect fit for it.
Hey, I got you a Mac.
We talked about it, and the consensus was the only safe way is to burn it.
Yeah, we were gonna like melt it down or something. Which I've also melted a computer, and on this I mentioned SMC fan control to turn up the fan speed on your computers, because when I was in China and there's very little air conditioning, especially where I was at, your computers get very hot, especially when they're running video programming software, video conversion software. So my computer burned up, and me and my dad figured out how to get it running again. But we put it in the oven and melted the motherboard when it was upside down. Well, so in China, apparently, we found out that the computer would turn on, and we found out if you turned it upside down and like threw a bunch of blankets on top, that it would get hot again. And I was able to start the computer up once and get my data off of it while I was in China.
That's so hot it unmelted the solder connections on the video card.
So don't put your computer under a blanket because it gets very hot, is the moral of that story.
Have you tried to sort of put it into the oven upside down, just go into Australia instead?
We didn't put the computer straight in the oven. We took the motherboard out.
We did put it in our
Yeah, but we did put the motherboard in the oven. All right.
What were you doing in China?
My wife is from China, so I was meeting her family.
I like the instructions for the multiple versions of Git through different folders.
Let me see.
I didn't know Composer enough to
Let's see, we mentioned the git config, we mentioned the file structure I'm using. How far down did you go?
This is actually one of them.
That's actually just above the Git setup. I thought that was pretty
Oh, installing Drush in multiple folders? Got it.
In using that alias, I hadn't thought to do that. I've just been unlink link, but this is less work intensive, I guess.
So I did link it. That was from a Lullabot article that I found. I think I changed it a little bit because they had Drush 6 on their list. And I'm not using Drush 6. One, because their instructions didn't work. Drush 6 was broken for whatever reason. And I didn't need Drush 6 because Drupal 6 is end of life now. I think maybe some other sites might use it, but I'm not using it. And they don't necessarily match, but
But no, Drush 6 is just broken.
yeah, I don't know. It's just old and I'm not using it. But if you're trying to install Drush 6 for whatever reason, their article has something that's broken, but it might point you in the right direction on how to do it. Definitely set up your config file for Git. So Git has this concept of commits, which is a file difference between what there was before and what there is now. And it's just the diff. And your name is attached to that in the repository. And so in this case, you set up your first name, last name, and your email. And this is committed to the repository forever. You can change it, right? So you could actually have multiple names. It's not necessarily a good practice to do that because then you're going to look like different users contributing to projects. I would pick a Git name that you're comfortable sticking with for a long time, especially if you're going to be contributing to open source projects. Otherwise, you're going to have all sorts of different names across all sorts of projects, and it'll just be hard to track. So I'd recommend setting that up right the first time around.
I have a dev environment question about your Drupal version. I encountered the inability to update to 8, Drupal 8, Drush 8, because package incompatibilities. So I did all the update through the NPM, I believe, or Composer, getting everything up to date, and it still would not allow it. I think it was an OS X issue, not sure, but has anybody else encountered that?
That pair thing, where you have to please install this version of pair or whatever.
I don't remember running into a pair problem, but I thought all of my packages were up to date. And now on my production environment, everything was fine. That was a Red Hat environment. Everything was fine, so I could use Drush 8 there, but I couldn't use it locally.
I know that what I have in here works, so I'm not sure what specifically you ran into there.
Because it was just a month ago.
How did you update your packages?
But I wonder how you installed Composer also.
Yeah, it was through a pretty broad baseline update. Let's see, so it was above Brew. I think it was my Node.js or NPM.
Well, if it was a node problem, we talk about using NVM a little bit further down. And Node Version Manager is something I can't live without working with Node because I run into Node version problems like multiple times a day, and I just have to switch to the right version of Node to get that working. So I'm always switching mainly between Node 5 and 6 is where a lot of the dependency problems happen.
So you have to go back and forth.
So NVM is a command line tool, Node Version Manager, and that will switch between Node 5 and 6 or any version of Node you want if you wanted to tie something to a specific version of Node. So you can do NVM use 5, and it does 5. And specifically, like a lot of the times you'll see you type some command and then it says, oh, this is incompatible with Node 6, use Node 5, or the other way around. And if you were trying to do that without NVM, you'd have to completely uninstall the package and install the new one, and it would just get kind of crazy. And I think Charles, do you use NVM? I know you were talking about Node a while back.
I use it, but just for like goldenrod and stuff. I'm not Brandon.
Okay. Well,
VM and not RVM, correct?
and then so RVM is a different tool. That's for Ruby. And that is another great tool also for when you're doing your grunts and your gulps and different things like that. You need different packages. I also like Bundler for Ruby because it just installs all of your gems along with that Ruby version.
Well, I think what I need to look at for this is the OSX, the El Capitan, because they have changed so many things, and I think that often causes me problems. Sometimes I wish I'd go back.
I'm on El Capitan right now, and I don't think I've run into any specific El Capitan problems. I know that originally I heard of people reporting a lot of problems with stuff, but I haven't found that yet.
Sometimes when installing through MP, I think it's if you install Composer through Node, I think it is, that you actually have to uninstall Composer to uninstall Drush 7 to install Drush 8.
Maybe,
It's really weird.
yeah, that
And it's
sounds
not
familiar.
recommended. There's pages on D.O that recommend not installing Composer through Node because it gives you errors.
So the recommendation was don't install Composer through Node because it gives you weird errors. And I also ran into that, and I uninstalled it and then installed it, I think with Brew was what I mentioned. Yep, yeah, because you find a lot of outdated documentation all over the place, and I think there was a lot of recommendations to install it with NPM, but that's, I think, not the right way to do it. I want to briefly mention code linting. I would like to see everybody have clean code that's readable and standard. So code linting is generally a command line tool that you would run against your code, and it would tell you what is the Drupal standard and make sure that you're using everything else that other people are, especially when you're contributing to an open source project. So if you were doing a contrib module or Drupal core, you're going to want to lint it with the Drupal coding standards so that your patch can actually get approved. And it gives you warnings. It tells you examples of things you would see are like white space and returns, right? So you would want to maybe put else on a new line, or if you have white space on the end of the line, you get rid of it. There's always one new line at the end of the file. So it's very standards based, but it's an important thing to do, and it keeps your code clean, and it makes you look more professional. So everyone should be doing it. And spaces instead of tabs. That's a Drupal thing. So spaces are preferred over tabs.
Remember, it did 5 spaces for every.
2 spaces. Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna let the linter yell at you.
Or just correct it.
Now, one of the things, Node is a community that's just changing like crazy, so that's another reason to have the Node version manager, is stuff is changing at a very rapid pace. And I think even from the time I originally wrote this to the time I wrote it now, we changed the JavaScript linting that we're using. So apparently Airbnb released some good JavaScript linting. Who knew? But the Airbnb base is apparently what we're using now. I think there was a Drupal 8 standard, and I'm not sure if they're compatible with each other, but this is what I'm using. I know that JavaScript and Drupal right now, how would you guys talk about the state of that? It seems kind of like it's the Wild West when you're doing JavaScript and Drupal. Anybody else get that impression? No? Okay. It's the Wild West period.
Brandon's like, me and my 6-shooter, we never had any problems.
Okay, I'm going to skip the Atom section. We mentioned RVM, we mentioned Node. SAS and Less I left out because they should be something that's project specific. And if you're using RVM, when you switch into your project directory, it will make sure that you're using all of the right packages. And there's different open sourced themes out there that would help you set this up. There's a theme called Aurora that 4Kitchens developed and open sourced, and there is a little bit of setup to it in regards to making sure the theme name and everything is right. But once you're past that, you can run just the standard tools to install and get everything running for Gulp. I think it's Gulp, could be Grant. I'm not sure which one Aurora is using, but it's using one of them. And so you can get, I remember when I was first trying to learn SAS, I spent so much time just trying to get it to compile the first time. So I'd recommend using a Drupal theme that kind of has that ready to go out of the box for you. And using the tools that we mentioned here, you should be able to do that.
You can also use SAS Meister.
Okay, Aurora, I'm going to expand, or Omega, I'm going to go a little bit further into this, that those are panels everywhere compatible themes, which means there's like nothing for you to go out of the box. Like literally you're starting from zero and then you have to build everything in your theme. So if you're looking for a ready to go theme, then that's probably not the answer for you. I don't know of any ready to go themes that use SAS. Do y'all know? What is it? Zircon? Okay. That'd be good to look into. Does Foundation use it?
Sure, the foundation.
But is there
No,
is there something with like some minimal, theming, like it doesn't look super terrible when you first open it?
Yeah, so the Zerb Foundation theme. Now, mind you, I only looked
Zerb?
at Zerb.
Zerb Foundation?
Yeah. And their last commit was an alpha commit on June 3rd, so it's an active theme.
I think they use SAS.
So Zircon, I mentioned, I just checked, they are SAS already built there.
I can't tell if they use it.
They're for Drupal 8.
So Zircon is for Drupal 8 and SAS is ready to go.
They had a nice thing already set up in October of last year before Drupal 8 debuted.
Yeah, so it
Nice.
says it says it uses Node.js and Grunt.js for rapid theme development, so I'm guessing SAS.
All right, so both of the themes mentioned are ready to go with SAS.
And if you're wanting to learn and start from scratch, Zen has it baked into the latest version. And so Zen's just covered in instructions.
All right,
So,
Zen is also a theme of mention.
no, the Zen.
Zen, Z-E-N.
If you want to learn theming, sub-theming, and everything Drupal on front-end theming, the Zen theme is covered in instructions.
When I was learning, I used Zen.
I think Brandon actually wants to say something.
Yes,
That's 10 minutes for reference.
Okay. Yeah, we're almost to the end. We're good. Okay. I use SQL Pro with specifically Drupal VM. You could probably use it. I mean, you can use it for different setups, but SQL Pro is a good replacement for if you were using Acquia Dev Desktop. It would be comparable to, God, it's been so long I forgot the name. I think it's PHPMyAdmin is what they use. So get off of PHPMyAdmin and use SQL Pro. Make your life nice and easy. It's also much faster. Let's see. I probably shouldn't put security as a post-install process, but you could remove some different options and make things more secure after you're setting everything up. Backups are part of security, right? Carbon copy clone is great for getting a backup of your machine, especially if you have a machine that might be open to the public or whatever. Backups, you've got to have those going.
Where does it get backed up on the server?
Well, so my carbon copy clone is on an external hard drive, right? So you just have an external hard drive, plug it in. It's a bootable copy. So if you did actually lose your hard drive, you could boot to this external device, or you could copy it back over to a new internal device, and it would still be bootable. Time Machine, it does incremental backups, but it's not bootable, right? So Carbon Copy Clone is the way to go there.
By the way, you might want to unplug it after you're done.
And yeah, unplug your Carbon Copy Clone.
The
Because-
ransomware stuff will get on your backups. They're connected on the network.
Yeah, if it's mounted, it's another volume, and it's just like any other directory on your computer. It's accessible.
So you can get both of your instances,
Right, so don't leave your backup plugged in.
triple cabinet.
Yeah, that would not be good. So here is a really cool tool that I linked. I'm not sure if its actual name is HyperKey, but it creates a HyperKey on your computer that is the equivalent of holding Command, Option, Control, and Shift at the same time. Most people don't want to hold down those 4 keys, but what that gives you is an entire other layer of shortcuts that you can assign to whatever you want. And so read that article, learn how to set it up. Slate is a window manager that I like mainly because I actually like programming. If you don't like programming, this is not a good tool for you. But you can use JavaScript to manage your window layouts. So if you had 3 monitors, you can throw windows between each other. You can have it automatically assign 4 windows to one screen and 4 windows to another just with a keystroke. So I use the HyperKey with Slate to throw windows around and get everything running efficiently because I don't want to be dragging windows or resizing them and all that. I use menu meters up at the top. You can see here that I'm tracking my Ethernet usage. This is my disk usage. Here's my CPU usage. So, I mean, I have processes that just get out of control sometimes. If you see your CPU at 100%, you probably want to go kill something, like kill the process. So then here's SMC fan control. Right now I have it on default because it's not that hot, but I can bump it up to a higher RPM, and that would increase my fan speed and cool down my computer. Postman is good for if you're doing any sort of API development. Let's see, what do we have here? I like to drag my utilities folder down here on the dock so that I have access to like my terminal and all the utilities. And then I wanted to say thanks to my mom and dad who are both here. I linked their GitHub accounts. My mom has her first commit on an open source project, and I think we're working on my dad's still. I want to thank Brandon and Rob for being great mentors. Brandon, you've really taught me a lot. And I want to thank everybody at 4 Kitchens because everything that I just talked to y'all about is something that I learned while I was working there. I didn't know most of this stuff beforehand. I was using Acquia Dev Desktop, FileZilla. I was not using Git. It was not a good place to be in, but now I'm in a much better place. So thank you everybody at 4 Kitchens.
Thank you for the pizza. It was an excellent talk.
Yep. Alrighty, we got 4 minutes. Are we calling it?
Any questions?
Questions?
Is this going to be available through the
Literally, once I hit stop, it's on YouTube.
on YouTube? Okay.
So it'll be on whatever I think you can find it by Austin Drupal Users Group, and that's the account on YouTube. Now this is going to be the first one actually uploaded to this specific account because it was created earlier today, and we were working the bugs out, but we'll work on loading some of the archived videos, like the security talk that I mentioned earlier.
Put the link on Slack.
And yeah, we'll definitely put a link on Slack. If you guys didn't join the Slack, it's adug-slack.herokuapp.com. And everybody should join and stay in contact. To the YouTube channel? Great. We have at least 1 subscriber. I haven't checked it. But so this particular YouTube account is going to be a community account. So we ran into the problem before where everybody had their own YouTube account and it wasn't shared. but this is going to be for the ADUG. Any presenter will have access to this, and they'll be able to upload their videos and do the exact same thing I did today.
Chris, thank you. Good. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And Chris, there is a pull request waiting for you on those Git instructions.
Yes, I'm so excited about the pull
It is
requests.
Creating a GitHub account, creating the SSL